Welcome to Learning Python with Turtle, Lesson 2. In this video, we're going to introduce the concept of variables, which is a concept that you may have seen in a math or science class, but hopefully you can appreciate. It's actually something you've dealt with pretty much your entire life. We're going to explore a property of polygons that will allow us to draw shapes a lot easier using the turtle. And then finally, we're going to conclude with a little exploration as to some rules that we need to adhere to when it comes to naming variables. So let's get to it. So as I already mentioned, variables is a concept you may have dealt with in a math and science class, but I would challenge you to kind of envision or appreciate that you've actually been dealing with variables your entire life. All a variable is some kind of a word or letter that represents some information, that stores some information, and that this information has some kind of inherent type. So for instance, in a math class, x equals 10, all right? X is the variable, and it has a value of 10, a whole number. Maybe you did something with, a rectangle, and the length was equal to 5. In a science class, you may have been dealing with the mass of an object, and it might have been like 100 kilograms, or perhaps the voltage in a particular circuit, 120. So these words have meaning. They store information. Now, from our everyday life, you can kind of think of it as, a contact on your phone. Well, mom. And mom has a phone number, and that phone number is blah, 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 whatever it is. Think about a lot of other things. When somebody asks your age, well, guess what? In your mind, you have an age stored for yourself. If you are asked for your favorite color, favorite color has some value associated with it. These are all variables that, again, we take it for granted that we don't think of them as variables, but this is stored information with some kind of a shortcut to it. Another one could be like your address. Somebody asks you for your address, boom, you have a whole list of numbers, city, state, zip code associated with that. We're going to see how we can apply variables to our programs. Now, before we do that, we're going to explore a little bit of what we've covered in a previous video. So in a previous video, we saw how we could use a bob.forward and bob.left to draw a triangle. And we notice that the angle is 120. There is a relationship here. So we got 3 lines with, represented by the forwards and an angle of 120. For a square, we got 4 lines with an angle of 90. For a pentagon, we have 5 lines with an angle of 72. All right. So again, you might be thinking, how am I supposed to follow these numbers? I got a slide for that. Okay. So it happens to be that the exterior angles of a polygon add up to 360. And if we look at the little chart here, we see that 3 times, 3 sides, and we had an angle of 120. Well, if we multiply that, we get 360. For a square, which had 4 sides, we had an angle of 90, which, guess what, multiplied also adds up to 360. And then the last one that we did was the pentagon, 5 times 72 also gives us 360. So we can deduce that sides times angle is 360, or better yet for our purposes, in terms of determining what angle we should turn the turtle at, we can solve for angle, and now angle becomes 360 divided by sides. Well, guess what? Angle is a variable. We're going to have that represent the angle that the turtle has to turn, and sides will represent the number of sides in our shape. So let's go back to Replit and try that out. And let's try that out on the triangle. All right, so I'm going to create a variable, sides equals to 3. And now I'm going to do that formula. So angle equals 360 divided by sides. Here are 2 examples of variables. Sides equals 3 and angle equals 360 divided by sides. So the other thing to note with line 6 is that one variable is getting its information based off another variable. That's an important and powerful concept in programming. because variable store information means we can use it in multiple places. So taking that, let's modify our program now. And just to prove to you that this still does produce a triangle. Because again, the computer did the math for us. It took the 3, because sides represents 3. The variable side is storing the value of 3. It replaces it here. And then it does the calculation of 360 divided by 3, which happens to be 120. And then it takes that value and sticks it wherever it sees the variable angle in the future. Now you might think, well, that's a lot of extra work for something that was relatively simple. We could have done the calculation by hand. That is true. But you'll see in a future lesson how being able to use variables will make it more flexible to do other things. So for right now, just kind of appreciate that we can represent information and that then we can use that information. Now I want to go a step further. There's another piece of information, and now this one might feel like, okay, there's a reason for this. That 100 represents the distance of the line, how long we travel. So if I create a variable called distance, set equal to 100, and then wherever I saw the number 100, I simply replace it by distance. Now, just to show you that it doesn't affect anything, we're still getting our triangle, but this might sell you on the benefit of a variable. Now, let's say I want to change the size of the triangle. I could simply change the value of this variable to 20, and that value, press twice, that value will be replaced with all the other statements. So instead of having to manually go through and replace all the hundreds, I could simply change the value of the variable. Let's do 200. Hopefully it's not that number. That's way too big. And there's the 200. Okay, so we can easily change the size of the triangle by simply changing the size of the variable. Now, technically, since the first lesson, you've actually already been working with the variable. That's Bob. Now, Bob isn't a number, but Bob is a variable that represents a turtle. So that's the other thing you're going to see in programming is that your variables won't always represent, simple concepts such as words, whole numbers, decimal numbers. Sometimes they'll actually represent more sophisticated things, but guess it's still a variable. All right, so that's the thing I want you to take away from this is that a variable stores information, and then you can use that variable throughout your program, as we've done here. Let's go back to our presentation, and let's review some rules we have to adhere to when creating variable names. So the first thing is that it has to start with a letter, whether it's lowercase, uppercase, or the underscore. The underscore is the only other character that's allowed in a variable name. After the first letter, then you can have any combinations of lower, uppercase, numbers as well now, as well as the underscore. So numbers are allowed in variable names just as long as it's not the first one. Thirdly, variables are case sensitive, which means capitalization matters. If you write two variables with different capitalizations, Python will think of them as two separate variables. Okay, so again, your spelling has to be exact. Variables can be of any length, but I will tell you, don't try to make them too small unless it really is you're representing the value of x, but don't make them too big either, because again, you're the one writing the program, so you don't want to write a 10-letter word for a variable. And there's certain words you should not use as variable names. So for instance, the word turtle would be a bad choice for a variable name because you're already importing turtle, where turtle is a library. Again, you'll learn about these reserved words as you go, but just realize that if your program screams at you about a particular word, it might be because of the word's already being used by the program. But the ultimate rule that'll probably make your life easy, if you simply use meaningful names, you probably will adhere to all these other rules as you go. So let's go back to the beginning and let's review what we've done in this video. So we introduced the concept of variables, which is representing some information with a word, a short letter. Again, we've seen this in math, science, and our everyday lives. We saw that there's a particular property of a polygon where the exterior angle is equal to 360, and we were able to create a formula to calculate the angle that a turtle should turn in order to draw a shape. Lastly, we reviewed some rules on how to name our variables so that our Python program can understand them. So hopefully you're excited about representing information and using it in your programs. Enjoy.